Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. You're tuned in to Between the Dark and the Light, the rock and roll photography of Jay Blakesberg, hosted by OWC, another great event put on by them. We can't do it without the man himself, Jay Blakesberg. Jay, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you doing? Nice to
Doing
see you.
wonderful. Great to see you. I'm looking forward to this probably as much, if not more, than all of our viewers. So I'm going to turn it over to you. But before I do so, I'm going to remind everybody if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat on YouTube. I want to send a huge thank you to the team over at OWC once again for putting on this presentation. They are hanging on in the background. So if you guys do have any tech specific questions, any questions on storage, any OWC products, feel free to drop those in throughout the duration of this event, and we will get some Q&A at the end. But without further ado, turn it over to you, Jay. I will see you in a bit for the Q&A.
Thanks, Derek. Let me see. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to go like this, and I believe everybody can hopefully see that right there. I'm going to also do a quick shout out. Thank you to OWC. They make my life easier and better. And so I appreciate their products because I use a lot of them. And I also want to thank B&H because they also supply me with a lot of stuff that I buy, including a 2x teleconverter for my Z8 7200 that I bought last week. So thanks to all those folks. And so I'm going to just jump into my presentation and start with a little origin story here. This might be the very first photo I ever developed in the darkroom. It's Jerry Garcia. It was taken in July 1977. We had front row seats, and my buddy Lozzie brought a camera with him, and I don't know who took it because we just passed the camera around. I was 15 years old. We developed the film in the darkroom. We made a print, and just like every other photographer who's ever talked about it said, when that image came up in the tray and that developer, my mind was blown, and I was off to the races, and that was 1977. So by 1978 I started taking pictures on a regular basis, let me see here we go. And I was taking pictures of my friends in high school. These were people we were hanging out with. It was the 70s. We were doing all sorts of crazy things. We did not have the internet to tell us how to live our life. We loved the Grateful Dead. We loved rock and roll. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the early pivotal moments that sort of were life-changing for me as a photographer. And the first one was when I was a junior in high school. I was 16 years old, and I took this photograph. This is a guy named Jorma Kaukonen. He was the guitar player in a band called the Jefferson Airplane and then Hot Tuna. And we were big fans. He played a solo concert at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey. After the show was over, I didn't even drive yet. The guy that drove us, my friend Lozzie, who brought that camera to Jerry Garcia, turned me on to a lot of my early music. He said, let's follow Jorma's limousine and get his autograph. So we follow the limousine, we get into New York City, we go into a delicatessen, and I say, hey, Jorma, how about a smile? And this is the photograph that he gives me. I took that photograph and I mailed it to Relics magazine, which was a music magazine that still exists today. They're getting ready to celebrate their 50th anniversary of Relics magazine. I've been a contributor for decades and decades. And I sent this photograph in with a letter to the editor about how we followed his limousine. They stopped at a deli. We got his autograph. He signed a $10 bill. We spent it the next day. And but for me, being a 16-year-old kid and having your photograph show up in print in a magazine that we read cover to cover really meant a lot. Nowadays we are, published every 30 seconds on social media. But to be published in print back then was a monumental thing. That was May 1978. In September of 1978, I photographed the Grateful Dead for the first time. This was on Labor Day weekend, 9/2/78. And my dad loaned me his Pentax camera. And these are the first photographs I did of the Grateful Dead. I was 16 years old. I started my senior year of high school a day or two later after this concert. And this was at Giant Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. That first month of my senior year of high school, I brought my camera that my dad had bought me for my 17th birthday after he loaned me his camera. and I got to photograph Bob Dylan at Madison Square Garden. And then the next night was Neil Young. And this was a Thursday and a Friday night. The internet told me that. And so, we had to convince my mother that we had to go see Bob Dylan on a school night, take the train from suburban New Jersey, go to Madison Square Garden. This is what was important to us. Rock and roll meant so much to us. A few months later, November 24th, 1978, I photographed the Grateful Dead for the first time with my own camera. My 17th birthday was a week later, but my dad had bought me a camera back in September, but I didn't have a telephoto lens until a few weeks later for that Dylan and Neil Young concert when I shot those. And then flash forward to another big pivotal moment for me. May 1979, I'm about 4 weeks away from graduating from high school. And we are down seeing two Grateful Dead concerts in Virginia and Baltimore, Maryland. We hear on the radio about a big, giant no nukes rally on the front steps of the Capitol. And so we go there, and there's people speaking on stage. And I look on the ground and I find a press pass. And I see Jane Fonda is up on stage speaking. And if you look down front there, you can see all the photographers: New York Times, Washington Post, Time, Newsweek. This was a really, really big deal. And so at that moment is when I looked on the ground and found the press pass. And before Jane Fonda could even finish her 5-minute speech on stage, I was on stage with Jane Fonda. I'm 17 years old. I'm still in high school. And then, shortly afterwards, Jackson Browne, Graham Nash, and Joni Mitchell are all up on stage singing. And then I turn around and Bob Weir and Brent Midland from the Grateful Dead are backstage standing there. Of course, I go over and introduce myself. I'm 17 and I have my first almost famous moment. And then 4 weeks later, I graduated from high school. So all of that happened up until this point, and I'm trying to still figure out what my place is in the script. September 1979, a few weeks earlier, I'd met a guy named Jay. He was a writer, and he was writing a review of a Grateful Dead concert happening in Rochester, New York, and then at Madison Square Garden in early September 79. I just started a photography program in New Jersey at the Middlesex Community College, had a great photography program back then. And so I took this photo of Jerry and this one of Bob Weir and Phil Lesh and Bill Kreutzmann, and the Aquarian Weekly, which is a free weekly newspaper in New Jersey, published it. You can see at the upper right there, it says September 1979 issue, September 12th to September 19th. It's weekly. And I got paid $7.50 for each of those photos for a total of $15, but I was a published paid photographer at 17 years old. I'm now going to flash forward to 1987 in the interest of time. And, all of this black and white work is just being developed in my basement, in my darkroom, in my mother's house. And, lots of things happened. I moved to the West Coast. I went to college in Olympia, Washington at the Evergreen State College. And in 1985, I moved to the Bay Area and was doing an internship doing video production and photography. And by 1987, I was out on my own, and I started submitting my photographs to Rolling Stone magazine. The photo editor there was a woman named Jody Peckman. And Jody liked what I would send her, and she would send me encouraging notes back and say, this is all pre-internet, no cell phones, none of that kind of stuff. And she'd say, thanks for sending these photos. It's exactly what we use. We'll keep you in mind for the future. And then on November 11th, 1987, the phone rang, and it was Jody Peckman from Rolling Stone. She said, hey, Jay, I have your big break. I need you to go photograph the free U2 concert in downtown San Francisco. And I need you to go meet this person at this hotel for a press pass. And I go down, and this is all in the film Rattle and Hum, the documentary film about the U2 1987 tour. And I'm in that film. I'm the guy down front shooting with a Nikon camera and the mullet. It was the 80s. I had a mullet, I'll admit it. And anyway, so I got this photograph of Bono spray painting on this piece of public art. Rock and roll stops the traffic. There was a big freeway behind where they were playing, and it was gridlock because people were stopping to see what was going on. And Rolling Stone published that photograph in their January 1988 issue. And this was the first time that I was published in Rolling Stone magazine. From that moment on, I went on to do another 300 assignments for Jody Peckman at Rolling Stone magazine over the next 30 years. And I was shooting everything that was going on out there there. And at the beginning, it was a lot of live concert stuff. So this is the Flaming Lips at the opening of Lollapalooza in Kansas City, Kansas in 1993, I believe this is. And then here's the half-page photo that ran, 94, I'm sorry, this is 94 Lollapalooza. And this is the half-page photo that ran in Rolling Stone magazine. Beck, in Golden Gate Park, shot for a radio station. This photo is in my current museum exhibit, which is at the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles through the summer. But what's going on here is that I'm standing on stage. He jumped off that speaker on the right, and I hit it with just a little bit of flash on camera to sort of freeze the action. And it sort of creates this surreal look of him floating above the crowd. But there's no Photoshop here. This is literally how it came out of the camera. This is the Red Hot Chili Peppers at Lollapalooza in 1992. Again, shot for Jody at Rolling Stone. And here's the spread that ran from that. It's a big 2-page opener for Lollapalooza in 92, and just some other live concert stuff that I shot. This is 9 Inch Nails, Lollapalooza in 91, Radiohead doing a free concert in downtown San Francisco in 95, right before the Bends came out, the Rolling Stones. This is Sonic Youth at the Tibet Freedom concert in San Francisco in 96. This ended up being the poster for the movie that they released from these shows, as well as the front cover of the live CD that was released. Soundgarden at Lollapalooza in 92. Tom Petty in 2005 at the Greek Theater in Berkeley. This is Led Zeppelin in 1988 at Madison Square Garden. This was a concert that was the 40th anniversary of Atlantic Records. And I literally mailed a postcard, two postcards to the local radio station. They pulled my postcard out of a bag, and I won a free trip to New York. I put on a fake backstage pass that I had left over from college, walked right up to the front and shot a couple rolls of the Led Zeppelin reunion, one of very few after they broke up in the 70s. But early on in my career, most of what I was shooting was live concert stuff. It's the low hanging fruit. It's easier to get access. It's just what we shot when we started shooting rock and roll. But I knew that if I wanted to have a career, I needed to be able to shoot portraits, right? If you looked at magazines, you guys remember magazines? Those are those things that are made out of paper with ink on it and sometimes words and pictures. You can still buy them in airports. And so if you looked at a magazine cover, what was on the cover? It was a portrait. If you looked at a CD package, a live record, not a live record, but a record of an artist, what was on the cover? A portrait. If it was a story about a live concert, or it was a live concert review, or a live CD or record that was coming out, yes, maybe they used a live photograph. So I knew that I needed to start doing portraiture. Jody at Rolling Stone hired me to do a photograph of John Fogerty. This is Tom Petty. Sorry, Tom, going back. Tom, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. John Fogerty in the federal courthouse in San Francisco. He was being sued by his record company for writing a song that sounded like another song he had written many years earlier. And so he was up on the witness stand with his guitar, and Jody at Rolling Stone said, "Hey, can you get a picture of him as he's walking out of the courthouse, or maybe with his lawyers, who are those 3 guys in the background on the right?" But instead, I brought a portable studio strobe light. It was a Norman 200B, got it B&H way back in the day. And I set it up on a light stand in the lobby of the federal courthouse. I put a chair there. Fogerty came out, and I did this portrait of him. And this is the first time I had a portrait published in print. And Rolling Stone published it in their rock and roll section, and as he wins the case. And so now Jody is starting to think of me as a portrait photographer, as well as a live music photographer. So she asked me to do a portrait of Boz Scaggs, who opened a nightclub in San Francisco called Slim's. And so there's the photograph that showed up in the random notes section. She asked me to do a portrait of Radiohead when their record, The Bends, was coming out. And this is a Polaroid transfer. So again, now we're starting to do portraiture, and we want to be creative. How do you get hired again by art directors and photo editors? Is by doing creative work. And so I had read an article in a magazine that Polaroid actually put out about how to do a Polaroid transfer. And so I started experimenting. And this is basically taking a 4x5 Polaroid that's shot on a 4x5 camera, processing it for 30 seconds, slapping it on a piece of wet watercolor paper. You burnish it down, you peel it apart after 60 more seconds, and you end up with a one-of-a-kind piece of artwork, and that's what these Polaroid transfers were. This is Green Day. Shot as part of my Blue period. That's a whole nother story. If you come to the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles, you can learn all about my Blue period photos. But here's a shot from that same session in a guitar magazine. This is the Bare Naked Ladies shot with the blue film on a 4x5 camera. This was for the record Stunt. This is inside the record. Radiohead in 95 also. Soundgarden in 92. So now, this is backstage at Lollapalooza in 92. I would bring full lighting gear, my Dynalite gear, an assistant, and get bands to pose for 5 minutes for me and do portraits of them. Tom Waits, this is shot with a half-frame camera. This is a 1960s Taurus camera, an Olympus Pen F, and it shot a half a frame per shot. It was a vertical half of a 35 millimeter. So each two vertical shots made one horizontal 35 millimeter frame. Sammy Hagar for Rolling Stone magazine. Alanis Morissette shot for Request magazine and BAM magazine the same day. And this was her first magazine cover ever, 3 weeks after Jagged Little Pill had just come out. Les Claypool from the band Primus. And now I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit. And this is Carlos Santana, shot in the early 90s, mid 90s. I think it was 96. And they ended up using this photo on the back cover of Supernatural, which was of course his 50 million plus selling record. And because this is the only photo that's on the actual CD, they also needed to do a publicity shoot. And so I got hired to do all the publicity photos for Supernatural as well. We went up to San Rafael in Marin County, and we shot at Carlos's house that he lived in at the time. And we spent a half a day doing portraits. Now, you also have to remember that at this point, Carlos Santana had not had a hit record in many, many years. And the record company really didn't feel like they were going to put a lot of energy into this record until, of course, it blew up with all of the hit songs like Smooth, et cetera, et cetera. And so the interesting thing for me is this is in 99 when we did this publicity shoot with these photos here. And when we delivered them to the record company, at this point, we had stopped shooting transparency film and we moved on to negative film. And then we would take negative film and we'd make prints. And I bought two scanners. I bought a flatbed Agfa scanner, which was about $5,000 at the time for prints. And of course from B&H Photo, and I bought a Nikon Coolscan 200, which only did 35 millimeter negatives and chromes. And so we started scanning our images and delivering them to the record company digitally, even though we were still shooting film. So this was the beginning of my transition to becoming a digital photographer. And we did this for many years. I mean, I would have do a shoot for like an album package. So for instance, more Santana stuff. And these are all new scans that are now done on an Imicon scanner that we use. Again, sorry to keep saying this, bought a B&H Photo many years ago. And, these Imicon scanners, which became Hasselblad scanners when Hasselblad bought Imicon, in my opinion, still are the best scanners out there. They run on Firewire 400. They run on an old operating system. We have 3 of them here, and we are still scanning all of our film on the Imicon / Hasselblad scanners. And but when we scanned the original images, we were doing some tests, and we would make prints, scan them on the Agfa scanner, and then scan directly from the negatives on the Nikon Coolscan. And I remember one of these shots of Santana ended up on the cover of Billboard magazine, and it was 3 different artists that were on there. And I could tell that the other 2 photos that were on there were taken on slide film, and they were slide dupes. We used to duplicate slides with macro lenses. It was basically a photograph of a slide on another piece of slide film. And I used to do it all the time. And you could see the difference in the quality between my photo that was from a scan from the negative, even on the Nikon Coolscan, which of course the color was terrible and the DPI and the resolution and the sharpness compared to what we do now. But at the time it was top of the line. Next thing up was a drum scan. And so you can really see the difference between delivering stuff digitally the way we were doing it versus delivering slides and letting the record company make slide dupes at the local lab. So when I shot the Aaron Neville record for the Universal Music Christian label, this was a gospel record. this art director that I was working with, she would choose 100 images and we would make 8 by 10 prints and ship her the prints. And so eventually we started getting technology that we upped from the 200 to the 400 to the 800 Nikon Coolscan, which eventually could do 2.25. So this shot's shot on the Hasselblad 2.25, and this is actually with a 4x5 camera. And so we could start scanning directly from the negatives, and rather than them paying a lab thousands of dollars to make 100 prints that then they would scan from, they would start giving us that money to scan and we would deliver digitally. So it was additional revenue for the studio, which at the time was really important. A lot of transitions going on in the photography world. The business was changing. There wasn't as much money out there as there was. The economy was changing, and so to be able to provide that service to my clients and scan directly from the film and be able to charge our clients for that was actually a huge benefit for me to help develop my digital studio. I'm going to flash forward a little bit more. Now we're getting into shooting digital photographs. So I stopped shooting film in 2008. I started shooting with digital cameras in about 2003, 4. I equate a lot of those early digital photographs that I shot to photos that were with like an Instamatic film camera. A lot of it was still just shot as JPEGs, not even as raw files. Certainly in 2003 and 4, there were no raw files. It might have been 5 or 6 where we started shooting raw files. And also, those cameras were very, very small sensors. It was a very different world. Today, I shoot all Nikon Z8 and all mirrorless, and it is mind blowing. Before that, I was Nikon, the D700, then the D800, the 810, the 850. I've been a Nikon guy pretty much my whole career in 35 millimeter, going back to the early 80s, and Hasselblad and 4x5. Wide Lux, those were all my film cameras, and then digital. I've always been Nikon, and have never veered away from that. So this is probably at Jazz Fest, but this is probably my Nikon D850. Could be the 810, but I think this is all 850. Done a lot of work with Carlos Santana over the years. This is probably with the D700 with the wide zoom. I love the forced perspective. And this was just done a few years ago on my D850, and this ended up being an album cover for Carlos. This is a backstage portrait that I did of Ralph Stanley, the bluegrass artist. And literally, he's just in front of a white backstage tent, but with some good creative digital Photoshop work. It's really an engaging, intense portrait of this person that was done very, very quickly. The Flaming Lips, all shot digitally. Again, the Flaming Lips, Neil Young and Eddie Vedder at the Bridge School benefit in 2010, I believe this was. Done a lot of work with Neil Young over the years. This is a shot that I did 7, 8 years ago, 9 years ago. And of course, that turned into an album cover. Tom Petty at the Lock-In Music Festival just before he died. And this photo was chosen for the cover of Rolling Stone for the tribute issue to Tom Petty. And this is my only Rolling Stone magazine cover. And this actually happened almost exactly 30 years after I did my first assignment with U2 for Jody at Rolling Stone in 1987. Just some more workflow stuff. Going back a little bit to the early days of the digital studio when we were still shooting film, we used a program called Image Access. It was a catalog program. This is pre-Lightroom. We had Apple Computer come to my studio and interview us on camera for about 6 hours one day, looking at our digital workflow and how we were doing that, because they were making I can't even remember what was their product called that was the competitor to Lightroom. You guys will all know that, and it'll be in the chat somewhere. But they were trying to build that out, and we were trying to explain how we use the catalog program. But at the time, Image Access, I have no idea who made it, whatever that brand was. Basically, it was just a way to be able to see thumbnails of all the digital files that we were making from scans. And also when we first were shooting digital files, even when we first started shooting raw, we would process them, make JPEGs, and put them into a different folder and keep them as JPEGs, because it wasn't easy to. Lightroom didn't really exist at the time, right? And so early Lightroom, of course, is way different than it is today. Lightroom's a very powerful tool. That's what we use. We also use Photoshop, but our workflow included both still, up until 2008, shooting film, scanning it, and getting it out there and cataloging it, as well as shooting digital until we switched full time. This is Neil Young in 2012, and then this is how we used it in Mojo magazine. Another shot in Rolling Stone magazine back in 2016. Neil Young shot down at the Bridge School benefit in 2015, I believe this was, and then that was used as a magazine cover. These are all digital, shot digitally, variety of magazine covers. Billy Joe from Green Day, the pigeons playing ping pong on the cover of Polestar, the Chris Robinson Brotherhood. This was also another shot of the Chris Robinson Brotherhood. And this is the Aquarian Weekly. If you remember earlier in the presentation, the first time I was ever published in print and paid money was the Aquarian Weekly. And then, 30 something years later, I got a cover of the Aquarian Weekly with the Chris Robinson Brotherhood. Les Claypool and Sean Lennon on the cover of Relics, Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead on the cover of Relics. This is from the same shoot for the cover of Guitar World magazine, or Guitar Magazine rather. No, Guitar World, I'm correct, sorry. Warren Haynes, guitar player. Again, these are all shot digital. This is an early digital portrait that I did of Dave Matthews for acoustic guitar. And then these next magazine covers are all going to be film. So we have Dr. Dre for The Source from 1996, Les Claypool from Primus, who I've done a lot of work with over the years. Neil Young, Tower Pulse. This was the Tower Records magazine back in 91. Another Les Claypool cover for Bass Guitar magazine. Joe Satriani for Guitar Player. And if you actually look at this photograph, it's actually shot on a piece of 4x5 film with the lens tilted forward. And you can see on the bottom, it's going out of focus there. And that's an intentional creative choice. The art director for this was a guy named Rich Leeds, who was a dear friend, designed a bunch of books for me and sadly passed away at a very young age a number of years ago. Roger McGuinn from The Byrds for the cover of acoustic guitar, shot in my studio in San Francisco. And if you look at if you go back and watch this presentation and you look at some of like my digital covers, right, versus some of my film covers, you can really see even how my style has changed. Shooting digitally versus film. When I shot film, I shot very dramatically in terms of how I shot. A lot of contrast, a lot of hard light. You can see it here on the Neil Young photo. This is just an outdoor shot. You can see here, this is, one hard light with a grid on it, lighting up Joe, where his guitar starts to get a little bit darker. And then the background, of course, is lit as well. So I did a lot of really hard lighting. This is, a little bit more softer again. Here's a cover with Carlos Santana from 99 during the Supernatural era. Again, and the other thing about this particular shot, this is shot on color transparency film, cross-processed as color negative film, which gives it even a more higher contrast look. And so, again, single light source on him, lighting up the background for separation, but you can really see how high contrast it is. And it didn't always work when you shot the super high contrast, a lot of dark shadows. And it's just a style of the time and something that I don't really do as much these days. Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, after Soundgarden broke up when he put out a solo record. Snoop Dogg for The Source magazine. This is a cover that I really love. The Examiner. This was the Sunday magazine, the San Francisco Examiner, and this is Wayne Wang. Wayne directed the Joy Luck Club, which was a very famous movie. He also directed a Jerry Garcia band video for a film called Smoke. But what's going on here is all of those shots are taken on my little half frame camera, and when I used to shoot with the half frame camera, I would shoot sort of in-camera collages. So if you look at that top strip on the two on the bottom, the top strip, those are all in a row on one sheet of neg. So I'd come in tight, I'd pull back, I'd split his face in half, do 2 frames, go back, do different angles. And so I created these sort of in-camera collages that were just scanned just like that, either on the strips of film or making a print and scanning that. And these are also, again, shot with color transparency film, cross-processed to negative, hence the super high contrast. And I shared this with the art director, a woman named Joey Rigg, and she really loved the look and the feel. and broke the rules. That's what I always said: learn the rules and then break them. And she loved this idea. We kind of concept we came up together to use these half frames, and she designed this. I give her full credit for this, but I presented it to her as an idea, and she ran with it. And I really love this cover because it's just not like a cover like this. Here's one guy, one person. You got room for your logo, the name of the publication, some headlines. Whereas here the examiner goes right over that photo, but there's so many other photos it works, and then a couple of headlines. So you got to remember when you're shooting magazine covers, they're always saying, where are we going to put all the text? Right. So here is a very straightforward film shot that I did of the squirrel nut zippers back in the late 90s. And I did this cover for Pulse magazine. This was the Tower Records. And the art director at the record company for them really loved this and then hired me to shoot two CD packages for this band, the Squirrel Nut Zippers. And one of them won a Grammy for Best CD Package for whatever year that came out. And so as the photographer, we get a certificate that recognizes us as contributing to that package. I mentioned earlier that I have a museum exhibit at the Grammy Museum. Super, super fortunate that I've had three museum exhibitions now in my career, and all of them are retro Blakesberg. And this is an idea that my daughter Ricky came up with. My daughter works with me full time, and we have a couple of different things that we do. Obviously, there's Jay Blakesberg Photography. There's Retro Blakesberg, which is an Instagram page at Retro Blakesberg. There's another Instagram page called at Jay Blakesberg, and there's a third Instagram page called at Retro Photo Archive. And real quick, Retro Photo Archive is we manage a bunch of archival photography collections only shot on film from the 60s, 70s, 80s into the early 90s, actually into the early 2000s. Only images shot on film for a bunch of different photographers, and that's Retro Photo Archive, and we're getting those images in. Only original negatives and transparencies, and we're scanning that and building out this archive. But during the pandemic, my daughter, who was living at home because she had nothing else going on and didn't want to live in her small apartment in New York City, came to me and said, how about if I start a new Instagram page for you called Retro Blakesberg, and it will be only photographs that were shot on film. And I thought that was a great idea. And so she grew that. And then we were approached by the Morris Museum in Morristown, New Jersey. And they asked us to do a museum exhibit. And they said, what do you want to do? And we said, how about if we do Retro Blakesberg, only images shot on film? And again, these are all images shot on film. They're all scanned digitally. They're all stored on OWC hard drives. That's part of our workflow, right? And they're all printed on Chromolux metal. And we've done three exhibitions, three museums. So the first one was at the Morris Museum. The next one was at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco. And it was originally supposed to be up for just 5 months, and they extended it to a full year. Actually, 11 months it stayed there. And then these are some photos from the Contemporary Jewish Museum exhibit. And this had 215 prints. And then currently it's at the Grammy Museum, and it's supposed to close mid-June, but there's talk about it being extended. We're going to find out sometime in the next week, hopefully, if it gets extended a little bit longer. So if you're in Los Angeles. But I do want to just talk a little bit about OWC, since they are sponsoring this B&H Event Space experience that we're all doing, is that OWC is a big part of my workflow, right? I shoot on all OWC cards, OWC card reader. I travel with OWC solid state hard drives. And so, when we used to shoot out on location, I always had to just save everything on my laptop because it was the only way that was fast enough to work. And I always back everything up to a second drive, but I couldn't really work off of any of the older spinning drives. And these little beautiful 4 terabyte solid state OWC drives have been a lifesaver, because now I do all my work off of those. And so when I get back home and import it into our master system on our solid state drive here that we work off of, it's just a seamless workflow. And it's just so much better than, because before, if I worked on my hard drive, then I had to transfer it to another hard drive, and then I had to import it into our master hard drive system, right? And then, the solid state drives are NAS connected drives, whereas my OWC Thunderbay 8 and 4 are DAS drives, desktop attached drives, and those upload easier to Backblaze for our cloud storage, right? So everything we do in-house here at the studio are all RAIDs, right? And they're all either RAID 6s or RAID 10s, I think they are. I think the OWCs are RAID 10s. One drive can go, if I'm remembering correct. Sorry, I have a full-time tech guy that takes care of all this for me. Whereas the solid-state drives are RAID 6. You can lose up to 2 drives. But essentially, we have 2,300,000 digital files in our archive. And we rely on companies like OWC to keep that stuff safe. It is so important, And the other thing I want to point out is looking through this presentation that we just did, I have a lot of stuff that we shot on film. I have a lot of stuff that we shot 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And in order to generate revenue from those photographs, they need to be accessible. And they need to be accessible quickly and efficiently. So we have an incredible cataloging system that we've created. We have them on multiple drives. We have access to them. And we also have one of those beautiful 8 terabyte OWC solid state drives that my daughter has in her office in New York City with everything that we shot on film. So she has the entire film archive for Retro Photo Archive and Jay Blakesberg on one single 8 terabyte hard drive in New York so that she can be working off of that all the time. So all of this workflow is super important. And I can't stress how important it is to find a brand that you love and that you trust and that really, really works. And for me, that has been OWC. So I want to thank Ian and Kristen and everybody there for showing me the way and setting me up with great systems and allowing me to just simplify my life and make it all work. I think that's all I got. I got one more slide. This is a photograph I took of Jerry Garcia on September 2nd, 1993, and I decided to end on this slide because the first time I ever photographed the Grateful Dead was on September 2nd, 1978. This is September 2nd, 1993. I love numerology. And so the world is beautiful and cosmic, and the universe spoke to us all and said, you're going to photograph Jerry. And he would never believe that you photographed him on the same day many years earlier when you were 16 years old. And today you're sitting in David Grisman's living room in Marin County, California, doing a portrait of Jerry. All right. I think that's it for me on my presentation. Derek, do we got any questions from anybody?
We sure do. I want to just stay on that numerology thing for a second. I think that's so cool. And I'm big into the universe, and everything happens as it should, when it should. Such a cool shot, such a cool story. So I just wanted to call that out. Who is or what is your most memorable photograph you've taken, Jay? Is there one that stands out among everything other, or somebody that you've worked with multiple times, or one time that really stands out to you?
That's like asking who your favorite child is. Yeah, but the Grateful Dead has a really solid place in my heart. So being able to do a portrait of Jerry Garcia, Bob Weir, Phil Lesh, Billy, Mickey, any of them has always been special to me. And there's so many photographs. I mean, Dead & Co. are playing an 18 show run at Sphere right now. We just finished the first 12. We got 6 more to go. They did 30 at the Sphere last year. So far, I've shot every one of them. Thank you, OWC, for that workflow. It's worked great. And so it still remains special to me. But photographing Tom Waits, Neil Young, Carlos Santana, people that I've been listening to since I was a teenager, these songs, this music has meant so much to us, these lyrics. And so, yeah, I got lucky. I got a career out of this. I get to hang out with incredibly cool and groovy and sexy people that make incredible music. But I love creating interesting, engaging photographs of these people that help tell the story of who they are in a single frame, or nowadays on Instagram, 10 frames or 20 frames or whatever it might be. It means a lot to me. And so there's so many great artists that I've worked with, and I just feel super, super fortunate that I've gotten to taken so many great photographs. So there are many, 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 many.
That's awesome. And it's funny, this presentation was right on time. I have, I think everybody has a group chat with their friends that they grew up with talking about music. And every once in a while, there's arguments. Who was the best at this? What's the best guitar solo? Who's the greatest drummer ever? And we were having a conversation this morning and talking about two distinct eras, through the mid 60s to the mid 70s, and then the 90s into the early 2000s, obviously rock and grunge, and then going back to the golden era of music. So it's cool for me to see, obviously when you started shooting young, there's probably people that you photographed that weren't iconic at the time, and you're just out there doing something you love. And then it's got to be cool to, have this illustrious career, but then see the ascension of people that you photographed when they were just getting their feet wet in the music industry. And then, decades later, people like me come along, and there's images that you showed, and I'm like, holy shit, I didn't know Jay shot that, but I remember it. I remember it from the '90s, and it's like these iconic photos. It was the one, and obviously the Soundgarden photo sticks out for me, and it's like, wow, it's like that's an image that sticks out in my head. Never knew you shot it, and so it's kind of cool. What is it like on your end?
So, well, that's interesting because that's a big part of the retro Blakesberg thing that my daughter is doing. She wanted to, a lot of people know of me as like a Grateful Dead photographer, Americana, jam band, hippie kind of thing. And we put out a zine a few months ago called Punk, and it's all my photos of punk rockers, but it's punk rock 3.0. It's No Effects, Lagwagon, Green Day, Blink 182, Bad Religion, Iggy Pop. It's people that or maybe the next generation of what punk rock was. It's not the Sex Pistols, although we do have a portrait of Johnny Rotten in there. It's not what was happening in the 70s. It was happening sort of starting in the late 80s, 90s, and on for me. So yes, I shot people like Neil Young, Carlos Santana, Jerry Garcia, and by the time I shot them, it's funny, they were in their 40s maybe, right? So they're maybe in their 40s, and I'm photographing them, and I feel like it's like the end of their career, which of course it wasn't, or the latter part of their career. But then, like you said, I was also there right at the beginning of the grunge era, right? So my college roommate, Stuart Hallerman, he grew up with and went to high school with two of the members of Soundgarden. And so he was their first sound man. So they played a small club in San Francisco in the late 80s, and I went and shot them and had dinner with them. And then I started shooting Soundgarden, and then of course you get Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Jane's Addiction. I met Wayne Coyne from the Flaming Lips in 1989. He wrote the foreword for my most recent book, Retro Blakesberg, which is the catalog for the museum exhibits and all shot on film that my daughter produced. And we're still friends to this day. I mean, the Flaming Lips in the late 80s and the early 90s, She Don't Use Jelly and all the big hits and everything, they were babies back then, and now they're 60 years old. Wayne and I are the same age, right? He's born in January, I'm born in December, so we're a year apart, but the same year, both born in 61. And, when we first started working together, in 89, what is that, 36 years ago, right? We were in our 20s, right? And so yes, I seen a lot of those bands. I mean, in 89, when I did my first portrait of the Chili Peppers, they were playing the Fillmore in San Francisco. If you were 20 years old, you're 56 years old today, right? You're an empty nester and your kids are out of college, and you want to get a print of that photo of the Chili Peppers from 89 from when you were seeing them, you're going to get a print and go to a gallery and buy it and put it on your wall because it means so much to you. So it's exactly what you're saying, is that these photos, span. I didn't shoot in the 60s. I didn't start shooting till the late 70s and really started shooting professionally. I mean, I have photos that I took in the late 70s that still get used in books and magazines and documentary films that I took when I was in high school and still generate money and interest and are historical. But really, I started when I moved to the Bay Area, 86, 87, 88, started shooting for Rolling Stone in 87, did 30 years of that. I did 56 covers for a magazine called BAM Magazine, lots of Guitar Player magazine covers. I probably shot, I don't know, 300 magazine covers. And that doesn't exist anymore. There are no magazines. There's very few, right? And if you're a 30-year-old art director working on a magazine, you want to work with a 30-year-old photographer, right? You want to work with your peers. So, it's an ever-changing business. And part of that really is, being able to have access to all that older material so it can show up today. So there's a lot of magazines that put out that are, I don't want to call them tribute magazines, but they call them SIPs, special interest publications. There's a whole issue on just the Grateful Dead, or there's a whole issue on the man landing on the moon for the first time, or there's a whole issue on Willie Nelson, or so there's stuff like, but there's also a whole issue on Beyonce, or Lady Gaga, or things like that. So anyway, there's a whole range of things, but having access to all of that material for me as a business, because what I do is art and commerce, right? And I've
Mhm.
got to merge them because I got to make a living. I've got staff, I've got computers, we got to buy new gear for B&H. Like we got all the things going on all the time. So we've got to be generating revenue, and that's what we need to do.
Definitely. Jay is single-handedly keeping me and the team afloat. He's keeping our job safe. So you guys got to thank him for
I
us
don't
putting
know.
this on.
I don't know
Uh,
about
J-
that, but I did literally just overnight from B&H just the other day, my
oh,
two-time
nice.
extender, because at the Sphere I wanted to get some closer shots of the drummers. Literally, that's why I got that just last week, and I brought to the Sphere and shot for the first time this last weekend, and it worked great. Even losing two stops, these digital cameras are epic with a little denoise on Lightroom, and it's all golden. So yeah.
Definitely. We'll get back to that gear thing in just a second. I do want to give a shout out to Arthur L. Johnson High in Clark, New Jersey. They are watching right now out in Crusader country. So the photo class there watching this presentation, they want to know if you have any advice for students who are interested in a career in photography.
Sure. So, of course, I did go to Arthur L. Johnson High School. And just a real quick side note, my senior year of high school there, they built a darkroom, the first ever darkroom. And the guy that ran the darkroom was the auto shop teacher because he knew how to develop film. He had done it somewhere along the way. I was the first person to make a print in that darkroom. They just would put some black paper and tape over the windows. And later on they cut the room in half and actually built a real room that was dark and half of it was classroom. And I made the first print, and here I am, 45 years later, still doing it. So thank you, ALJ. Advice for students. So I've actually spoken at ALJ twice in the last 10 or so years to the students there as a guest. And my advice is, if you want a career in photography, or as a filmmaker, a dancer, a graphic designer, anything creative, you have to work 10 times harder than anybody else, right? Like if you want to be a nurse, you can go to nursing school, pass your exams, get all your tests, and go get a job as a nurse probably anywhere in the world. But you can go to the best photography college in the world and do everything right and get out and never land a photography job. So you have to work 10 times harder. If you want to be a photographer, you can do it, but you got to work really, really hard. And that's my advice. Be prepared, right? Be a starving artist. That's what I was. When I first started out in the 80s, I lived in a house with six roommates. Rent was $135 a month. We put in $10 a week for food. You can't do that anymore, unfortunately.
Mm-mm.
But and I took every little tiny crappy job that anybody offered me that paid me $50, $100, $200, and that's how I started my career. Because the last thing I wanted to do was have to go out and get a real job. God forbid, a real job, right? I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a photographer, and I wanted to be a rock photographer. And I went out and shot everything that I possibly could. And I remember, my wife would even say things to me like, "Wait, who are you shooting this for? Do you really need to go shoot this?" And I'd be like, "Yes, I need to go shoot this. Nobody's paying me. I need to go shoot this." And those photos are on the wall of the Grammy Museum today. So this is history. This is in the moment. When you're there, you're not thinking, "Oh, what are we gonna be thinking about this moment 30 years from now?" People are thinking about it in today's terms. Oh, it's on Instagram. People saw it. It's done. But the things you're shooting today, tomorrow, last week, a year ago, in 20 years, you're going to look at these pictures and just say, "Holy wow." Like, wow. So I have a whole series of photographs on deadheads, people dancing at Grateful Dead concerts from the 80s and the 90s, hippies, fans, the modern day hippie tribe. And we have an exhibit coming up in Los Angeles in July at the David Kordansky Gallery. It's a 60th anniversary, celebrating 60 years of the Grateful Dead. And we're going to do a wall of my Deadhead photos, right? Really big, about six of them. And when we look at those photos, what we didn't realize at the time is that everybody that was at those shows was in the moment to be in the moment because there was no technology. There were no cell phones.
Mm.
Nobody was taking a picture. Nobody was making a film. Nobody was putting it on TikTok or Instagram. That was just a science fiction fantasy, right? And today, when you go to a concert, everybody has this, right? And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it is. It just is. And so when you look at these photos from 1987 of people at a concert that are in the moment to be in the moment only, that will never happen again, right? It will never happen again. And so those photographs become an important document of pop culture history. And so you have to look at it in those terms. Everything you're shooting really is some sort of historical record. It could be a historical record of your family. It could be a historical record of a band, an artist, a movement, politics, sports. It's a historic moment. And so for me, that's what's always interested me. So with Retro Photo Archive, our big initiative is preservation. A lot of this stuff is ending up in dumpsters, bankers' boxes, in people's basements, in the basements of university archives, never to be seen again. And we want this work to be out in the world and stay in the name of the photographer. So that's what Retro Photo Archive is. And so that's what me and my daughter and my team here, Chris and Taylor, who work for me, the four of us are working on is keeping the work alive, getting it out there, and keeping it in the photographer's name. And so any photo researchers out there, you're looking for archival images, check out retrophotoarchive.com, Instagram. You can find us. So go ALJ. Thanks for watching, Kristen. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's such a great point. It's funny. I was at a show recently, and it went from lighters back in the day being held up during shows, and now people turn their flashlights on their phones. So that's such a great point, Jay, about what we might see in the present and not really think twice about 20, 30 years from now. I always tell people that photography is one of the few things in life that appreciates the further you get away from the moment. Whereas most things lose value, photography, really, the further we get away from that moment the image was taken, it's gaining value because we're getting further away from that moment, further away from that place in history. So that's such a great point about really just documenting the world around you, even the little things. Remember the iPhone, the headphones with the cords. It's like we never thought those were going to be a relic, and what did it take, like 2 years for those to become a relic? So
yeah. I mean, look at the early computers we were working on. I remember the very first computer I bought, which was pre anything photo, was a Dell computer. I basically bought it to make invoices on Microsoft Word and write letters, and incredibly expensive, as you can imagine, but at 100 MB hard drive, right? And so if you put that in perspective, that is two photographs from my Z8 would fit on that 100, and nothing else, no software, no applications, nothing. Literally two photos. I have 2.3 million digital files, stored on OWC hard drives and the likes. That's where technology was, in the early 90s. And so we've come a long way in 30 years. And photography has always been a technology-based art. Even when it was on film, it was a technology-based art. But nowadays, it's even more. We all have the same cameras and the same sensors and the same software, but it's how you imagine it to look and feel that opens up the whole world to so many new things. And it's amazing. I love seeing other people's photography on Instagram and whatnot because it's moving, it's engaging, and there's so much great stuff out there.
definitely. We had a question come in from Visual Modulations. I love this question. Obviously you had decades that you shot in the film era, and now obviously with the advancements in mirrorless, we got all the bells and whistles. You didn't have the autofocus like you have now back in the day. With you using, obviously, the Z8 is one of the most advanced. The autofocus on that camera is probably one of the best out in the industry. How do you get caught up in the bells and whistles? Is there parts of you that are still stuck in what you used and practiced for years, or do you take full advantage of what you have at your fingertips now?
Both. So obviously I take advantage of the autofocus. That photograph of the Chili Peppers where the guy's jumping in the air, that was the flyer for the museum and whatnot. Just to put that in perspective, that shot on film with a manual focus camera, and shot on slide film, not even negative film, slide film, which means you have what, a half a stop of exposure latitude. If you're over underexposed, your photo is gone, right? So shot on slide film, manual focus, manual exposure with changing lights. Okay. So yeah, we captured lightning in a bottle. Now, I would say my digital transition has evolved. I try and use as much of the technology that the Z8 affords, as much as works and computes. But I know that the young kids are doing way more with it. Like I still quite haven't figured out how to make the 3D tracking thing work for me. But there are other focal points in there where it still gives you the facial tracking across whatever zone you're doing. And so I found ones that work for me that keep track of where the people are. But without a doubt, I am treating my new gear both. I mean, like I'm not shooting auto ISO. I'm not shooting any kind of aperture priority or program or shutter speed. It's all manual. I'm still shooting manual exposure, but without a doubt, trying to use the autofocus. I play around with some of the multi-exposure stuff, in camera multi-exposure stuff. I have a photograph hanging up in the museum. It's a multi-exposure shot of Jerry Garcia from 1980, and people are like, "How do you do that?" Back then you would take a picture, push the film rewind button on the bottom, advance the shutter without advancing the film, take another picture, and keep doing that. And so I have like this photo of Jerry Garcia. It's got like 5 exposures on it, and now you can pre-program how many exposures you want to do and go click, 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 and you get your 5, and the only thing I don't love about the Nikon is that when you do that, the final image it gives you, the multi-exposure, is still a JPEG. It's not a raw
Okay.
file. I think Sony maybe gives you a raw file on your multi-exposure from what my Sony friends tell me. But you still have all the individual raw files that make up that final JPEG, so you can recreate it, I guess, in Photoshop. But the point of it is to do it in camera and then just have it spit out. It gives you a decent sized JPEG, but it's still a JPEG. The bastard child of the raw file. But anyway, so yeah, we shoot all raw, and we have a lot of data out there. Yeah,
Definitely. Well, Jay, I
which
want to
is
thank
which
you
is
for your
scary, which
time.
is
Yeah.
scary to have that much data. Like that's the bane of my existence for the rest of time, is that I've got to keep all of this data safe. So I'm
Is it
hoping
is it
that
harder? Is it harder for you now? I mean, back in the day, it's like as much technology as we have, everything was easy back in the day as far as like it was all physical, it was tangible. Now
yeah.
it's cheaper, it's more vast, but I don't feel as secure. I don't think there's like I still like printing. I don't feel completely comfortable until I have a print here and it's like, okay, I can file that.
Yeah, I mean, we have all my negatives. We've scanned hundreds of thousands of them. We've scanned them on the Nikon 200, rescanned them on the 400, rescanned them on the 800, rescanned them on the Imicon Hasselblad, stepping over old scans, because at this point, we want everything as big as possible. You never know what you're going to use.
Hmm.
At the time, I remember 10 years ago, hard drive space was still expensive, and we took about a 500,000 digital raw files, NEFs, Nikon electronic files, and converted them all to DNGs and cut the size of them way down because storage was so expensive. Now the DNG, of course, still has all the same information in it and loss lists, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't do that anymore because now hard drive space is a lot cheaper. But boy, we're filling it up fast. My Thunderbay 8, which has got eight terabyte hard drives in it, it's filling up fast. Ian and Kristen out there in OWC, we need to talk about another one. I think I'm ready for that next eight bay Thunder Bay 8, which is just incredible, and so we're working off of those OWCs. We're doing some of those OWCs are just cold storage stuff that we don't look at, but we still want immediate access to it, and that's backing up to Backblaze, so we still have multiple versions of it. We're really still always reinventing our storage, but always making sure, Backblaze is really for catastrophic, right? We're not working
Hmm.
off of Backblaze. It's if something goes horribly wrong, we know that it's still all there, right? And so we're always constantly reinventing, and that's where a lot of these OWC Thunderbays are coming in because they're transferring easier for us to Backblaze. And so we don't need as many multiple copies and multiple raids and, RAID 6 with 2 drives that can fail because we feel pretty confident with the drive. And then we're even backing some stuff up on just some bare drives that we have in cold storage that aren't even spinning, right? So we're always trying to reinvent how we're storing stuff. What do we need access to immediately? what do we need to be on the solid states just for the immediate workflow and editing, which is less and less. We're doing it on the solid states and then moving it over to the and I hate to use this word, less expensive, but just as equally important, spinning drives. And it's all just about, storage. I'm working with a filmmaker named Chris Benchetler. He makes these incredible ski films, and I know he works with all OWC. We've had this conversation, and they're just filling up eight Thunderbait 8 drives on every shoot that they do because it's all 8K video. If you don't know who Chris Benchetler is, just look him up on YouTube. Look up Chris Benchetler Fire on the Mountain. That's his last film. And he's finishing up the new one, which will be Chris Benchetler Mountains of the Moon. And I've been on a couple of those shoots doing stills. We sit around and we talk about OWC drives and how quickly we're filling them up. I mean, it's insane, but it's important. And the other thing is it's important to share this information.
Yes.
When we first developed our workflow early on, people came to us and said, how are you keeping track of everything? And if you look at our 2 million files, it's literally in like 20 master folders that then break down into subfolders and subfolders and subfolders. So we can find anything like that. And that's just how we built it. And so we've had a lot of photographer friends come to me over the years and say, show me what you're doing. I can't figure this out. And there's exceptions to the rule in terms of where you're finding things and where you're keeping things. But for the most part, we're incredibly organized, and storage is just going to be a part of our lives forever. So find what works for you, and OWC works for me. So find what works for you and stick with it, and really develop it and build on it.
Definitely. And Ian dropped in a very important message here. Keep it current. Yes. Technology changes, stuff gets phased out. You really got to stay on top. I thought CDs were going to last forever, and I was wrong.
Right. And those CDs and DVDs, which I have a gazillion of also. I mean, I have stuff still backed up on magnetic tape without even a machine to put them in, right? Found them the other day. I'm like, why am I holding on to these? But I am, somebody's got that machine out there. But, we thought DVDs were going to last forever and indestructible and back it all up. And even that stuff corrupts after a while. You put, because I pulled a bunch of that stuff out recently to see what was
film's
on there.
Peeling off, like the film layer.
We used to just save JPEGs on hard drives and take the original TIFF scans and put them on DVDs and store them. And then at one point I said, well, let me get rid of all these JPEGs. And we spent weeks and weeks putting them in and pulling stuff off of slow drives and whatnot. And we're only, compared to what we scan now, they were still only a quarter of the size TIFFs, but we did upgrade to the TIFFs. But some of those discs we threw in the drive and they were like unreadable. Like they've done nothing but sit in a closet for 18, 20 years, 25, whatever, since, 2005 or 6 to 20 years, and they just won't even play. They won't even go. It's like, so no, there's storage is ever evolving, like Ian says, and you got to keep it current. You got to update, every 5 years, you got to be changing out your drives because that stuff's going to fail. Even the best of the best, it's gonna fail. So you gotta have a plan. You have to have your backup. So when it fails, you can just migrate it over from your other backup without it being too difficult.
Yeah. I mean, look, if having Jay Blakesberg on talking about storage as much as he's talking about rock and roll photography, that tells you how important it is. Kind of drives it home.
Super important. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you listening and watching. And let's do something again, maybe in person, Derek. Maybe I'll come to New York and we'll do something in the space. I can do
Definitely.
I can do a killer 90-minute presentation that'll really bore everybody.
Hey, you don't got to convince. I was ready to go. I'm like, I could sit here all day. You just show images and just talk. Let you do your thing. That's why I make my intro nice and short and get out of the way.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you watching. Go ALJ, Crusaders.
There you go. Jay said it best. Huge thank you to Jay, OWC, the crew over there at ALJ as well. Shout out to them. And that's all we got for you for now. Another edition of the B&H Event Space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.